Hello, welcome to Matter Over Mind. My name is Stephen, and with me, as always, I've got he who plays with plasma. It's Thomas. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, how you doing?
Very, very well. Yeah, good. Right, okay, so this is part of our... We're still sticking with the dyads. I think it's been a failure, if I'm honest, but we're carrying on. I think, maybe do something different for the next season, but we're doing dyads still. So this is part of a two double episode, and the other one was about your experiment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's quite heavy, lots of complicated things to understand. So I thought maybe we'd do something a bit easier, a bit lighter. So I was thinking of, like, I don't know, I suppose common psychological ideas in film and television.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about what the evidence is for some of these things and debunk some of the myths, if they are myths. So I've sent you a list of certain things and you've had a look at those.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to hit me with the first one on that list, and we'll talk about it?
Yeah, so if you've ever watched any rom-com ever, there's always the, whether it's the guy or the girl, there's always the kind of the neat and tidy proper one, that they're dressed nicely and they go to their proper job and so on and so on. And then there's always the kind of bit of the chaotic character who's a bit of their life's in a bit of a mess and whatever else. And they always attract each other. So I guess opposites attract. How true is this?
Yeah, so that is a good one, isn't it? And yeah, you're right. I mean, it is an absolute stalwart, and not just in rom-coms, is it? It's kind of in all sorts of drama. They start off enemies and become either best of friends or lovers. Yeah, so yeah, the interesting thing is it's not true at all. Okay, so that one's not true. Well, I suppose let's get into it a bit. So there has been quite a lot of work done on this. I should say that I'm drawing from lots of sources here, so this is not research that I've done personally. It's not stuff that I've studied personally, so I'm really, drawing on lots of other people's work, which I can put some references to on the Facebook page. But basically, there's been lots of research done about this idea about attraction. What is it that attracts us to somebody else? And there is quite a bit of work around, first of all, attractiveness. So physical attractiveness, which is a bit of a tricky one because it is quite subjective. But the general consensus is that on average, most people marry or have long-term relationships with people that are pretty much a similar level of attractiveness.
Okay.
So if you ever want to know how attractive you are, look at your partner.
Oh, great! Yeah.
Which I'm delighted by that. I don't know how it's worked for me, so I think I've made up for it in other areas. Because I know I'm punching above my weight with my wife, but yeah, that's quite interesting. So generally speaking, people tend to end up with people who have a similar sort of level. And again, this is subjective, so it has to be done through surveys and people's sort of general assessment. But in terms of personality, actually, it's the opposite, really. If you're thinking about longer term relationships that last, so I suppose this is where there is a bit of a caveat on this, like there will be on quite a few of these points, actually. The caveat being, are we talking about, initial wow, look at them, or I'm, that first time you meet somebody and you're just blown away by them, just by their force of personality, or just they're really interesting or whatever. That's one thing, but then the other thing is how you get on. I think there's probably a case for, somebody that's quite different. There might be a sort of interest because they're different. So, there's a sort of novelty effect. There might be some of that initial attraction, but in terms of long-lasting relationships, people generally like to stay with people that they get on with, they understand, they've got something in common with. Some of that classic study by Don Byrne seems to suggest that actually there's people they like other people who are similar to them because it reinforces their view of the world.
Okay. Yeah.
So remember we talked about schema theory going back to a previous episode. So that comes into a few of these little examples. But if you think about schema theory, we kind of make models of the world, of how things work. And so when somebody comes along and sort of has models that are similar, they're likely to fit into our way of understanding what's going on in the world. And so we kind of appreciate that. We like that. And it confirms that we are actually right, So I think we're more likely to be attracted, certainly longer term, medium term, long term, to people who are similar to us than the direct opposite. So the question is, why is it always in the films and TV shows? What do you reckon?
I reckon it's like the... in the films, you never really see the happily ever after like 10 years.
Good point.
It's always
good point.
They get together right at the end of the movie and then it kind of finishes. So maybe it's like the, like you said, novelty. It's something brand new, fresh, it's different. And then we don't actually see how these relationships actually,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's often, that's right. I think, and the other thing is, I think we have to remember that stories like in films and TV are a very peculiar, very specific structure. We tend to think of TV and film as just being kind of, I don't know, a way of telling a story. Well, it is, but it's a very specific way of telling a story. And there aren't that many different ways of doing it. So you get these, what we call story arcs, and it fits the story arc really well, So it starts off one way, there's something that happens that makes something change, and there's a period of growth through the story. So it just fits it so nicely. So I think it's more that, actually. So it fits stories, but it doesn't necessarily reflect psychology. All right, so that's one myth debunked. What else you got?
So the next one, we've got sort of repressed memories and retrieval, I guess, of these memories through some kind of hypnosis or some event or something. So I guess like the Jason Bourne is a good one. He loses his memory. I can't remember how. I think he falls in the ocean or something. And then he's trying to piece together who he is, but he's got these super special combat abilities and he knows everything and he's just good at stuff. So suppose somebody had years of training in the way he does in the movie, but loses their memory. How likely is it that he can just do all those things again?
So that's a really interesting question, Thomas, actually, because I refer you back to what was his name? I've forgotten his name now. The guy who had encephalitis and lost his memory. Do you remember we talked about Waring, I think his name was. So he actually demonstrated that a lot of those bits of memory that relate to music, for instance, obviously he was a musician, he was a conductor, he was a musician. He still could play the piano beautifully, and obviously he still could speak English, and any language skills you've got, you would maintain those. So actually, I think that's the bit actually of the Bourne series that I could believe. So if he did have amnesia, if he'd been trained in these fighting techniques, I think actually he may well still have those, because they are different types of memory. They're not semantic memory. So these are memories that are related to body movements and unconscious activities, like driving a car. That would be another one. Even if you've got amnesia, you'd still be able to drive a car if you ever learn to drive one. So that bit is okay. I would go for that. Okay. However, the idea of repressed memories is so people do have amnesia, so don't get me wrong, people do lose their memory, some people have amnesia, but this is amnesia often based on repressed memories. So this is where people claim to have had experiences that they've forgotten. So like in the X-Files, lots of other abduction stories where people claim to, or that people have had, they feel like there's something wrong, and then they go to a hypnotist, and they put them in a trance, and they take them through this process of retrieving their lost memories, and this is on television all the time. It used to be absolutely every series would have a repressed memory episode, and you'd have a hypnotist there, and you'd be listening to this hypnotist talk them through, and then they'd be there, and they'd say, well, I'm in a room, there's figures standing over me, I'm scared and something's happening now, what are they doing, and they would then be retrieving these lost memories. So that's all complete and utter bunkum.
Okay.
Absolute bunkum. So that's actually a really interesting case. So quite a few years ago, I think it was when Celine was still at the University of London at Goldsmiths, we went to, I don't think you were there, I'm not sure why you didn't come along, but Celine and me and Celine's mum went to an event at Goldsmiths, and they invited along Elizabeth Loftus. She's a world-renowned expert in memories, and she did a lot of work on repressed memories, particularly around, you won't remember this because it's before your time, but have you ever heard of the Satanic Panic?
Oh, yeah, that's something about Dungeons and Dragons or something, right? Everyone was...
No, this was I think it was during the 80s, I think. I could be wrong about that, 70s or 80s. But there were these cases of therapists doing things like hypnosis and so on, dealing with troubled children or children that had some behavioural difficulties, and they started to report that these children were talking about bizarre satanic rituals that were happening at their school or their parents, and things like that were going on. And it became like a massive story and some of these things that they were talking about were just absolutely ridiculous. They were so far-fetched, it just didn't really stand up to scrutiny. But it took a long time for this to be revealed, and Elizabeth Loftus and her work was part of finding out experimentally, what can happen during these sessions where people are highly suggestible. So one of the things about hypnosis is it's a state we don't know all that much about, but we know that people are very suggestible during that state, and it's easy for people to end up planting, even by accident, ideas and images and so on in people's mind, and then because they've remembered it, or they've constructed it in their mind, I should say, through this process of suggestion, that's there then. And then what happens is they then start to remember it, if you see what I mean. So they then start to, when they wake up from their hypnosis, they're then able to talk about what they think's happened to them. But it's because it's been sort of implanted in their mind. So very interesting. They've done a lot of work on this, and they've demonstrated that this is a real phenomenon. You can get people to think they remember things just through these sorts of suggestions, and very, very interesting. We also so many of our listeners will probably remember my previous podcast with Celine, my daughter, and we actually invited Chris French on from Goldsmiths to talk about the Satanic Panic and that. So you can always catch that. It's still up there, and he talks about that as well. So yeah, the idea of having suppressed memories and hypnosis bringing these things back, there's not really much evidence for that. In fact, what the evidence is that if something really bad has happened to you, then you're likely to remember it. So if you've had,
that makes sense.
I know that sounds obvious, but people might, they might have confused, especially if it happened very young. So if somebody's had a really terrible experience very young, then obviously that's a bit of a different issue in that they were, memories at a very young age and not sometimes they're not laid very well, and so they can be a bit fragmented. But if something really bad happens to you, generally speaking, people remember those things. Now there is something called dissociation, which there is some evidence for, but that doesn't mean you forget entirely what's happened to you. So dissociation generally, so when we've spoken to experts on cults, for instance, they like Alexandra Stein, she talks about that, but you're kind of almost zombified. You're just going through the motions, and you're not in a position to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to follow your instruction. You just kind of you check out. But again, that's not saying that you'd forget everything. So I think what I would say about a lot of these things is, because the brain and the mind is so complicated, we don't understand it that well. I guess to say that this thing could never ever happen is probably wrong. But I think we have to say, is this a real thing? Is this something that psychologists and so on would recognise as being a scientific thing? Now, there are some therapists who disagree with this. So there will be some, if you look it up, you'll find that there has been a bit of a debate, but they are very much in the minority. And from a scientific perspective, not much, if any, evidence for this as a thing. So now, hypnosis doesn't, this regression where you start bringing people into this trance, which is part of the reason why, a lot of these alien abduction stories, I'm afraid I don't believe them. Just don't believe them.
Yeah,
okay,
that makes
next.
sense. Okay, so the next one is, I suppose this is probably more the effect of adrenaline. Can it make you super strong? I mean, you hear these stories, these anecdotes of this woman pushed a bus over or whatever. Now, I've always been a bit dubious, but I'm not a doctor, so what do I know?
So, so the one that always reminds me of is the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk? Yeah, you've read the comics?
Yeah. The big green man, yeah.
The big green man, yeah. So, Bruce Banner or David Banner, depending on whether you watch the old TV series or the comic strip, the story went, as far as I remember. I was never a comic guy, actually. So, did you read the comics?
I've read a few comics in my time. Because I thought it was he got irradiated, and that's what the gamma radiation turned him into the Hulk, which, from a physics perspective, is a lot of rubbish.
I was going to say there's some crossover here, so you can give us the physics of it. So you're telling me that gamma rays don't make you into a muscle-bound He-Man?
Probably not, no. I mean, most of them would just pass straight through you.
Right.
And if they're ionizing, they're going to knock a few electrons off the atoms in your body as they go through, which probably will give you cancer, maybe not super muscles, unfortunately.
It's not such a great story, is it, really?
No.
Yeah, so what I remember of the story, and this is the TV series. When I was growing up, there used to be a TV series of the Incredible Hulk. And the story there, I think it was obviously drawn from the comic, but his wife, he had a car crash, and he was flung from the car, but his wife was in the car and she couldn't get out, and the car caught on fire, and he's desperately trying to lift this car up because he knows that she's going to die in the car, and he's desperate to get her, and it doesn't matter how hard he tries, he cannot lift this car, and she dies. So this is the trauma that he has. So he's a scientist, so he decides to, first of all, look, because he then hears stories of, similar to your story, women who pushed over buses and stuff. And he thinks, why couldn't I do that? Good question. Why couldn't I push over my car? And so he starts to try and investigate it. And he comes up with this machine where he thinks that it's these rays, these radiation rays that could give him this strength. But obviously something goes wrong. as it always does in these things. So he's not controlled anymore. So when he gets angry, he turns into the Incredible Hulk. So that's, but this is linked to adrenaline. So the idea is that it's basically around this thing, adrenaline. But of course, adrenaline can only maximise what you've already got.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got quite strong muscles, then the body will rebalance things during times of intense stress.
Yeah.
So when we get afraid, we have various chemical changes in our body. One of that is adrenaline, which pumps extra blood through our veins, or at least it pumps it quicker, let's say, and it means the heart can beat faster. And it means that we, for a short period of time, can have bursts of energy that we wouldn't probably normally do. Plus, we tend to... It's one of the reasons why, people say if they got in an accident or something, if you fell off your bike or something, you might say, it seemed to go in slow motion. Have you heard that?
Yeah. So
that's because... We think that's because, because of the extra adrenaline and the heightened... senses, you're hypersensitive to everything at that moment, so it feels like everything's going in slow motion, but you couldn't keep that up for any length of time. You'd flake out. So adrenaline, I'm afraid, no to super strength.
Could there be an argument that, now again, I've either read this somewhere on the internet or I'm just making it up, but that your brain puts natural limits on how much muscle tension, I guess, you can use, such that when you have adrenaline, you remove those limiters and you can use 100% of your body's physical capability, and that's why you're stronger. Is that anything, or am I just making it up?
I've not heard of that.
Okay.
It could be true, but I've not heard it. It doesn't sound right, to be honest.
No, it's kind of like those movies where it's like, I'll unlock 100% of your brain, and then they have psychic powers and all that stuff.
I was going to talk about that. Oh yeah, let's talk about that one. That's a really good one, because that is super stupid. It is the stupidest thing. I don't know about the adrenaline one. I think it's more likely that you have this sympathetic nervous system that controls how to feel, how to react to things. It's like if you're in a fight mode, the fight or flight response, basically. I'm not a biologist, so I'm struggling with the detail there, but that's basically what's happening. You mentioned about the 10% of your brain. I was going to mention that one. So Lucy, that's a film. Have you seen Lucy?
I've not seen Lucy, but this thing, I've not seen it very much recently, but it was a thing for a while when it was just unlocking the full potential. And there's always like 10% of your brain, or it's like you use the other half when you're asleep or some nonsense, or it's like, you can't use all of it because, I don't know, there's always some reason, but then they show them how, and then,
so the film Lucy is based upon this premise that we only use 10% of our brain. I remember growing up, this was a myth that everybody talked about. Do you know what? You only use 10% of your brain. Imagine if you could use more, So the inference there is that we've got great potential, which means we could do things like, telekinesis or mind reading, because we're not using much of our brain. We need to learn how to use the other 90%. But it's just utter nonsense. We don't... the way somebody explained it, which I think is a really nice little metaphor for this, it's a bit like you couldn't use everything of a single anything at the same time. So, for instance, imagine a car wheel going round on the road. Now, you could claim that do you know what? That wheel is only ever using 1 millimetre or an inch. I don't know how much of the actual contact with the road is at any given time in a car, but that tyre, that wheel is only connecting with the road for a fraction of the time. Most of the wheels not touching the road.
Yeah.
And of course that is true technically, but that's just the way wheels work. You can't use all of it at the same time. That's silly. So no, that's nonsense. Don't believe it.
That's a shame. I was really hoping to unlock my physics potential and know everything.
Because in Lucy, she gets this. It's quite a shocking beginning. She becomes a mule for carrying drugs.
Okay.
And then she gets beaten up, and this drug releases into a system. And again, like all these best stories do, instead of killing her, it makes her super smart, where she can control things with her mind. Yeah,
that's interesting. It sounds like I read a short story not that long ago. It was a collection of stories. I can't remember the author's name, but it's the author who wrote the story for the Arrival. You know that movie?
Oh yeah.
And so that the Arrival story or Arrival. I can't remember what it's called in the book, but it's one of many. And one of them, this guy almost drowns, and he gets brain damage, and they inject him with some magic new hormone, and it basically makes it a similar sort of story, to the point where he's the way they describe his psychic powers is he can sort of release and sort of I guess absorb hormones that are in the air in a slightly different rate to basically break people's brains, and that's how he does it.
Ted Chiang is his name, I think.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
I mean, it's fiction, so that's fine. But doesn't really happen. I think there's also a film called Phenomenon, with what's his face, the guy who was in Saturday Night Fever and Grease. What's he called? John Travolta. He's in it, and the story is that he has this something goes. I think it's a disease, but it makes him super smart. And again, that's these are all they're just devices. So as long as you accept it's just fiction, then that's fine. But no, it doesn't really happen. Okay, what do we got next?
Okay. Next one is everyone has a little bit of OCD. I guess you could replace OCD with a bunch of other things. But you always see, I mean, the example you gave here is friends. Or you see it a lot on like TikTok or Instagram. Someone will just describe, they're like, I don't know, sorting their cutlery drawer so the spoons aren't mixed with the forks. Right. Oh, I'm a bit OCD. I think it's... As a non-expert, I think it's a load of rubbish.
Yeah, but, okay. Why do you think it's rubbish then?
Well, I mean, because being a bit particular is a bit different to having a disorder, Do
you know what? My work is done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of an insult to people who have a really serious condition. I mean, OCD... is incredibly obsessive compulsive disorder. It's incredibly debilitating. I mean, you can have severe cases of it, which obviously in theory means you can have less severe cases of it. But it's as you quite rightly said, it's a bit more than just not wanting your potato to touch your beans. It's that's not OCD. So I've seen some cases of OCD, and it can be absolutely, they can't leave their home. They cannot function in the world because they have these rituals that they have to go through. And sometimes those rituals are nothing to do with the thing, so they might have to, before they go out, to tap on the wall 3 times, or do this certain ritual that they have to do in order to feel okay about doing it. So there's some of those. And there was another case that I remember learning about where this woman would become convinced she'd killed somebody. So she was driving home from her sister's, and it was dark, and she got home, no problem, but then she started to become convinced that she'd killed somebody on the road. She'd hit somebody, and it started to, it was absolutely horrific. Imagine thinking that So yeah, it's a pretty horrible thing, really. I know that's not how people mean it when they say I'm a bit OCD, but it's not just being a bit particular. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay then. So the next one is multiple personalities. So there's a couple movies here. I've not seen these, but the one that I have seen is Split.
Okay, tell us about Split then.
What's the guy's name? I always forget his name. He plays Professor X in the reboot of the X-Men's.
James McAvoy. James
Yes,
McAvoy.
that guy. Yes, so he's in this movie. I guess spoilers for like a 10-year-old movie, guys.
Yeah.
So there's these three girls who get kidnapped by this guy, and he's the classic kind of creepy sort of character that you get in these movies. With the bit of a dork character, but also a little bit strange. One of those guys. So he kidnaps these girls, and then he locks them in his basement. And then throughout the movie, he swaps between these characters. And one of them's like the aggressive one, and one of them's the kind of caring, nice one, and then one of them's just like the neutral guy. And so basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is, in these movies, or I guess media, when they present it, there's always, I guess, how realistic is it that the personality switch is such that they have no connection at all?
Yeah.
I guess. How accurate?
How accurate is it? So this is it's a really good question. So thanks for that, and that's an interesting. I haven't seen that film. I might have to check that out. I do like a bit of McAvoy. He's a good actor. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's quite controversial. The one that I saw recently was called The Crowded Room. Tom Holland plays a guy, again, spoilers. We should have said at the beginning of this, spoiler, because it's all about film and TV, isn't it? But yeah, Crowded Room obviously relates to this idea that his mind is like a crowded room, and he's got all these different people, and you don't realize this at first. You see him talking to people and interacting with people, but what you don't know is that these people actually don't exist. And it's a bit like, I suppose, the other one is Fight Club, which probably everybody's seen. In Fight Club, again, spoilers, everybody. Gosh, I keep saying it. So in Fight Club, it's brilliantly made because, of course, you just simply don't know. And yet there are lots of little clues that you sort of see along the way. Now, again, I just repeat the fact that I'm not a clinical psychologist, so this is not my area of expertise in any way. But from what I've researched is it's by no means accepted by all psychologists as being a real thing, although it is in the DSM manual, DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for clinical psychologists. So clearly, it has some merit. But there are some things that a lot of these films do that are unlikely to happen if DID. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, but now it's called what's it called? Dissociative identity disorder. So it's called DID, and the idea is that you have these different personalities that express themselves in different ways. There's a couple of cases that became kind of tests, or very big cases. One was a woman, I forget what her name was, but there was a film called Sybil, which was a film about her. It was a book, I think, first, and then the movie with her back in the 70s. So there was a case of somebody called Billy Milligan, who was accused of kidnapping, robbery and rape. It seems like he definitely did have psychiatric problems. He'd had a really bad sort of upbringing and everything.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think he had other personality issues, but the consensus was that he had these different personalities, and he ended up with claiming to have 24 different personalities that would sort of come and go, including a violent Yugoslavian, an intelligent, well-spoken Englishman, a mute boy who played the drums. There was another guy who apparently spoke Arabic, which did seem that's quite impressive. That was quite strong evidence. But it turns out that he shared a jail cell with somebody who could write Arabic, so that kind of spoiled that one. So I think there's a lot of feelings that actually that case was, he was put up to it, or there was a particular therapist who kind of introduced this idea of was very influential in the whole idea around multiple personalities, and later on it was found, in fact she was the one that brought this Sybil character to the fore. Later on when she died, it was found that she'd kind of made a lot of this stuff up, so but it's still in there. And again, I think it's one of those areas where we can't say that it doesn't exist, but I think there's quite a lot of skepticism for it. And I think one of the things that film often gets wrong is that they talk to each other. So as far as I understand it, these are so separate that they don't know that the others exist. So they'll report things like memory lapses. They don't know how they got somewhere or something, and that's more likely to be true because that is part of the things that happen when you have this condition. But you're not going to be talking to each other because you wouldn't know each other exists. Yeah, so that's a bit less.
Fairly common trope, isn't it?
Say again, sorry.
Yeah, that's a fairly common trope, isn't it? They're like behind a closed door or whatever.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, I guess, like Gollum. Gollum from Lord of the Rings.
That's true.
He talks to himself.
That's a good one. Yeah. So it's not kind of completely debunked. I think the other thing that's quite interesting is when they've done scans of people's brains who claim to have these different personalities, there does seem to be different regions of the brain that's lighting up at these different times. I haven't seen that research. That's a secondhand report. I'd like to see that personally because I'm quite skeptical about that. But anyway, that's one of the in favour, I suppose, claims. Okay. So yeah, I can't say for definite that one, but right. Let's choose one more because I've got a couple of extra things that I want to talk about.
Okay. So I guess one that I'm interested in, I mentioned this in the preamble that we did before we start recording, about basically reading someone's mind by looking at, micro facial expressions and, slight looking of the eyes and stuff. So the show that comes to mind for me is The Mentalist, which, if you don't know what this is, it's a guy who I'm pretty sure his backstory is like he grew up in the circus and his mum was a fortune teller, and she taught him how to basically read people's faces and all this kind of stuff to basically infer stuff that they're already telling you, just low key. But obviously in this show he helps the police. He's not a policeman, but he helps the police solve crimes, and in the show he basically gets everything right first try all the time because he's mentalisting his way through these scenarios. Is that a thing? Is that real? Fair enough. Okay.
Next. Okay, so I'm being a bit more serious about that. So yeah, this is the series that I thought about when I thought about this was Lie to Me, which is, what's it, his second name is Roth, is it Tim Roth? He plays a version of quite a well-known psychologist called Paul Ekman. Paul Ekman did lots of really interesting work around body language and so on. And he believed that you could tell whether somebody's lying through these micro expressions on the face. So these micro expressions would last, fractions of a second generally. But if you watched really carefully, you could spot when somebody was lying. Obviously, a very, very complex set of cues. And I think the way that they would do it would be to video an interview. So in real time, I think you'd be very pushed to notice that. It'd just be too quick. It would all happen too fast. So if you videotaped it, you might be able to slow it down and just notice some of these things. But unfortunately, the evidence just isn't really there for it. So your strike rate is looking, 60%, something like that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So if you think about 60%, that's not much better than guessing, is it really?
No, I suppose not. Unless you're a Bene Gesserit, because they can do it quite well.
So
that's basically their
that's
thing.
it. That's their thing. Bene Gesserit's from Dune, from the Dune books and movies and so on. Yeah, they have these mythical skills, but based on this idea. But it's just the problem is that body language is a really powerful thing, and it's something that we do use, of course. I always say to my learners when I'm doing my management courses, body language is, we're all experts at body language essentially, because we learned that's our first language. So even babies, they can recognize a smile very, very early on, and they recognize facial expressions and so on very, very early. So we learn body language, but it's a very imprecise skill. So because our bodies are complex and we've got lots of our body, we've got facial expressions, we've got our eyes, we've got our mouth, we've got our hands, and all of the rest of our body positioning, it's complicated. And the best it can do really doesn't tell you it doesn't give you lots of information other than emotional information. So it doesn't tell you data or facts. It tells you somebody's emotional state, or at least it gives you lots of clues to their emotional state. And the problem with micro expressions is that it could be telling you that they're uncomfortable, or that they're trying to remember something, or that they feel ashamed about saying what they did. But lying is a very tricky concept to pick out, because the person might believe it, the person might convince themselves about it, they've played it in their mind so many times they do believe it. They might be nervous about talking about it. They might be second guessing what somebody else is going to ask next. There's all sorts of reasons why somebody might behave in a strange way. So that's one of the problems with it. So yeah, it's not really, it lacks validity and reliability, which are the two things you're trying to look for if you're looking for any psychological tool. Is, does it have validity and reliability? Validity is, does it tell you about the thing you're trying to understand? So does it tell you whether somebody's lying? No. It might tell you that somebody's nervous, but that's not validity of lying. That's validity of their emotional state. Does it tell you whether they're lying? No. So it's got low validity, and reliability is poor as well, which means if you did this test lots of times, or with different experts, are you going to get the same result every time? And the answer is no. So it's not reliable. So that's why it's not really very it's not used really, not in any proper, in a real world situation. It might be used to give you a clue as to whether the person's nervous or anxious, and that might help the interrogator then to say, right, we need to target that thing, because clearly he's worried about that question. You could see look really uncomfortable when you ask him that question, or just the micro expressions show that he's uncomfortable. I think can be used there. And then, right, okay, let's ask some more questions about that. Let's try and, dig into that a bit more. So that's it will be useful. But in order to, yes, he's lying, no, he's not. Nah, it's not. But the same goes for the other one that is often used. I mean, in every TV show and in Meet the Parents is the lie detector test, polygraph.
Yes.
Got the same problem with that, really. Low validity, low reliability. So they're not used generally. I mean, they might be used as a way to tell if somebody's nervous, or they might suggest something you need to home in on. But as a way to tell somebody's lying or not really. The best way of looking for lies is to, and they do this a bit with the polygraphs, but is they look for a baseline. So so the best people like this, so the Mentalist, I've never seen that program, but maybe this is what he does, and this is what some like illusionists and magicians and also fake psychics do. This is the cold reading stuff. They might have a conversation with somebody for quite some time, and they essentially set a baseline, and they say, well, this is the way this person normally communicates. So when they're comfortable, they communicate like this. They have these little facial tics or these little facial expressions. This is their normal baseline way of talking or way of communicating. And then what you're looking for is, after the prompt, the question is, what are the differences in that against that baseline?
Yeah.
Make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
So you're not...
Yeah, I was going to say that makes more sense that would work than just, I guess, Sherlock Holmesing into a room and winning.
Exactly.
That makes sense. I suppose, you're looking at, I guess, deviations from the norm, which
exactly
is, I guess, a good as test as any. But as we're talking about this, it reminds me, there's a sketch by a guy, I think he's called Pete Holmes.
Okay.
And it's I think the title is something like Sherlock Holmes Sucks at Deduction or something.
Right.
And it's obviously parodying Sherlock Holmes, and this guy comes in and he makes a bunch of wild statements and backs it up with his evidence, and then the guy's like, no, that's completely wrong. I'd recommend watching it. It's quite funny.
Sounds like something David Mitchell might do that somehow. Cool. So these are, again, they're great characters in fiction because they have a sort of superhuman ability that we all think, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could learn that. I remember when I first wanted to learn psychology, I honestly thought that I'd maybe get some skills like that. I'd be able to understand people so much better. And I think it does help you to understand people, but it's not a superhuman power,
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes. I thought, rather than being a sort of Debbie Downer on all these things, I thought, well, what is there that seems like a myth that is used sometimes in TV and film that feels like it would be a myth but actually isn't, is something that's real? So I've got a couple. I've collected a couple here that you might be interested in. So the first one is called the Mandela effect. Have you heard of that?
Is this the one where you you remember something being a particular way?
Yeah.
And it's just completely wrong.
That's right. That's it.
Okay.
So they talked about this at the that thing I was telling you about when we went to Goldsmiths about false memories, and they Chris French, who was the host of the thing. He said, you may remember, so you're much too young to remember this, but many of our listeners will remember Live Aid. So Live Aid, for those of you that don't know, was of course Bob Geldof and other musicians. Bob Geldof of the Boomtown Rats band got together and raised money for the famine in Ethiopia, which is going back sort of 30, 40 years now. And there was a concert called Live Aid, and I think they did it at Wembley and in New York at the same time. So it was a huge thing. And of course, all throughout the show, we watched it on TV, and all throughout the show were interviews with people talking about raising money for help for the people in Africa who were experiencing famine, and it was all about fundraising. So every 20 minutes or so there'd be another talk about this, and they also interviewed people about it, and Bob Geldof was on the interview, or was interviewed in it. And I remember this. I remember them talking in a round table situation, talking about, that they need to raise this money. And Bob Geldof talks, getting more and more. He's a very passionate guy, very angry about what was happening to these people, and really wanted people to contribute. And he said, "Give me your effing money now!" And he banged on the table, and everybody looked a bit sheepish because this was on the BBC. You're not supposed to say that during the day on the BBC, and everybody looked a bit nervous about that. And okay, everyone remembers that. And Chris French said, "You might remember that happening." It didn't happen. It never happened. Okay. He didn't say it.
Did he say something like it? Or?
He said something like it. I forget the exact thing it was, but it was something like, we need your money, something like that. Call now or something. But he didn't say we need your effing money now. I'm not swearing because we want to tick the box that says no bad language on the Apple thing. That's the only reason. But that's the reason. But yeah, and you know what? In my head, I still remember that. But lots of people also think this. So obviously, I'm not the only one. Lots of people believe that this happened, and I think what happened was there was a comedy sketch sort of years later which played that, and I think that's what's got into our heads. But he never said it. So there's a few of these that are around. So it's called the Mandela effect, because it goes back to lots of people believed that Nelson Mandela actually was killed in prison in South Africa. But of course he did get released, so he wasn't dead. He was released. But it did lead to lots of conspiracy theories. Lots of people still believe, if you probably don't type Mandela effect into YouTube, but if you do, you'll find lots of nutcases believing that at a certain time in history things were reset and that we're actually in an alternative universe. So TV and movies, there's lots of these things. Fringe, which was one of my favourite and Celine's favourite TV shows, that has that sort of storyline, but there's two universes, so essentially that's what's happening. But the butterfly effect, all these kind of films where different things happen in different timelines, but you kind of feel like you remember something different. It's that sort of effect. So the effect is true. We do have that psychological effect, but obviously not because of parallel universes.
Well, maybe. We don't know.
I mean, you'd know more about that than me.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe there's some entanglement between the timelines.
Yes, exactly. Right, and the last one I want to talk about, because I don't know, I was just going to say, I always remember this, and it's kind of weird because, of course, you do. That's the whole point. It's called the Baader-Meinhof effect. Have you heard of that one?
I've not heard of this one, no.
Right. So when I was growing up again in the 70s, there was this terrorist group, left-wing terrorist group in West Germany called the Baader-Meinhof group. And they have got zero to do with this effect. It's just that this guy said to somebody else, I heard about this group called the Baader-Meinhof gang.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Now I see it everywhere. And that's it. It's this frequency illusion. So basically, when you're told about something, perhaps a bit different than normal, suddenly you see it everywhere.
Ah, okay, yes. I've definitely had this.
Yeah.
I used to think, when I was younger, I used to play, play video games. And there's one particular game where you could, take cars and drive them around. And you could find these cars. And there'd always be the cool cars that would only pop up once in a blue moon. And then as soon as you'd get one, they'd be everywhere.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, well, yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. Cars. I think cars are a big one because that's my go-to example as well. I think so. I remember when I was in the early days when I just learned to drive, didn't have much money, so we bought bangers, really, old cars.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start looking for a particular type, you'd see one, and then suddenly they'd be everywhere. You sort of notice them everywhere, So that's the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. It's this, once you know about it, or once it's pointed out to you, you see it everywhere. And what's going to be interesting now is, as a listener, if tomorrow you come across the Baader-Meinhof effect, then, or in the next few weeks, then that'll be it. So why is that happening? And I think this is really interesting because this relates to all sorts of beliefs around sort of psychic phenomena and belief in fate and all those sorts of things, So if you have a dream about something, I dreamt about this person, or I dreamt about this thing, and then you see them the next day, you think that's amazing. Oh wow, I dreamt about that thing and I saw it the next day, or I saw it after a couple of weeks. Is the fact that it's in your mind though means that you're more likely to notice it. You wouldn't notice it otherwise. So it's as simple as that. It just means that you're primed really to see that thing. That's quite interesting.
Okay. Yeah, but now what you're saying makes sense. but when it's happening, I don't know. It's weird. I don't like with the car thing. Yeah, like I'm playing this game. I spend ages looking for like the red of whatever car. I get in that. I finally get that red car, and there's been none. And then now I've got it. There's loads. Yeah. There's a program in the game working against me.
It does feel sometimes like it gives you that feeling where you feel like it's solipsism, isn't it? Where you feel like basically you are the world. Everything else is being presented to you based around your perceptions of the world. It's a very unhealthy way to live, really. But I think you do get that strong feeling sometimes that this thing is weird because I've just heard about it and now it's everywhere. But it is because we see and have exposure to lots of things all the time. We talked about this limited processing power that the brain has. So most of what comes in we ignore because we can't process it all. So we have to have these schema, these models. And again, this is what's happening because you've now got a new schema, including this new car or this thing that you've noticed, then you're going to notice it more. So I think it is explainable. And I suppose it's similar to deja vu a little bit, so we get these feelings that we've experienced this thing before. Sometimes it feels really strong, that feeling. And, the evidence is that, of course, we could have been there before but have forgotten. That is possible. Or it's just that there's things about that experience that just match some other schema that we've we've used, and so that kind of fits neatly into that. But that's why you get that feeling of familiarity. That's my take on it.
I see. And you mentioned deja vu. I suppose a little bonus one is on The Matrix 1. There's that cat that basically just appears 2 times, and it's like, oh, deja vu, which is not right.
It's not deja vu, is it? It's not even deja vu. I mean, that's not what deja vu is it? Whoever experiences that, who goes, this person just walks past you, and then the same person walks past you again at exactly the same time. No, that's not deja vu. That's the same thing happening twice.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, so that's all I've got, I think. Well, I've got more, but I think we're done there for tonight. That's fun. I enjoyed that. We got to talk about film and TV. It's a bit lighter. Very much lighter than the next episode. So we're going to have a couple of special episodes coming up in a couple of weeks. What is it going to be about, Thomas?
The big question.
Yeah.
God.
What
is God all about?
So the big G. We're gonna talk about God, and we thought that'd be quite interesting because we could look at it from those 2 perspectives. So we're going to do the same again. 2 episodes released, but one will be looking at God from a physics perspective and a science perspective, and the other one from a psychological perspective. So is there a God? Is there evidence for a God? What would that look like? What is the evidence for and against from a physics standpoint? And also, what's the psychological implications of belief or not belief and all of that? So I think that could be really interesting. Could be controversial.
Might be a bit spicy.
Cool. All right. Are we done?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. It's been good fun today. Thank you, Thomas, for those questions. And there's a film that I'm going to try and watch now. That one of them is that what was it called? Strike? Split. Sorry, Split is one, and the other one, there is actually a film called The Mandela Effect that I've never seen, so I want to go and find that as well. So there's 2 films I've got to go and watch now.
Nice.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Bye.